Alrighty. Hello everyone, welcome to a short guide on runes for the basically end of 2017. I realized that the first one I made at the beginning of the year didn't go over all that well, so I wanted to make a new one with a slightly different format that would help you guys make your own decisions, and I'm actually pretty confident that these are the right choices. So let's get into the runes that I think you should shop for and try to use in 2017. So let's open up. As we go into my set of rune pages, I made a very ugly looking sort of chart of what the actual good runes are in League of Legends. And basically, as you can kind of see by the chart here, there's a bunch of different marks, a few seals, a bunch of glyphs, and a bunch of quints. The way runes really work in League of Legends is you're always making a choice between offense and defense. Sorry, you're sometimes making a choice between offense and defense. In marks, they're always offense, with very, very few exceptions. In seals, they are always defense, with even fewer exceptions. And then with glyphs and quintessences, it's up to the style of your champion and what lane matchup you're in. And so what I basically did is I went through the runes that I know to be good, and I went through some pro games that were played recently, and I categorized these runes in terms of tier lists. Basically anything that's an S tier, like attack damage marks and magic penetration marks and attack speed quints and things like this, are runes that basically every single account should have and every player should have, because they work on so not only do they work on virtually every champion in the game, but they're actually optimal on most champions in the game, or at least a lot of champions in the game. So it's very easy to get a lot of mileage out of these runes. S tier runes, basically, if you only ever made 2 pages, you would probably use these S tier runes. And even if you have 20, you'd still be using them. And then A tier runes are slightly more situational, where they're still going to be useful on at least 2 roles. And that's kind of where I drew the line, basically, is an S tier rune is going to be used kind of at all times. An A tier rune will either depend very heavily on the matchup, or they're only going to be used in certain roles, meaning if like you never play top lane, for example, you might never use this rune type. Or if you never play support, you might never use this rune type. And then B tier runes are runes that are probably worth having in your account, but probably only work or are good on a single type of champion. Like, for example, lethality marks are only any good, really, on physical damage assassins. And, precision marks and even smaller subset of champions. And armor marks are basically only good on supports. And even then, only some support. So that was kind of how I broke it down. And so you can kind of see here from the shopping list the runes that I consider to be high tier, top tier, whatever. So what I'm going to do basically is kind of break down what each of these runes are for, so that you kind of understand what you want to be doing. And essentially what I'm trying to do here is, instead of give you 20 rune pages, I'm going to tell you why you use each rune, and I'm going to have you kind of go in and mix and match based on the roles you use, okay? So we're going to start with the very obvious, the attack damage mark. Attack damage marks, I think, are pretty obvious what they're for. Basically, they are the generically good physical damage mark. If you are anything ranging from Lee Sin to Riven to Yasuo, sometimes to Varus and Ezreal, to Jarvan, Olaf, Jace sometimes, pretty much if you are a physical damage dealer, you are almost definitely running attack damage mark, which is why it's an S tier mark. Similarly, a magic penetration mark is basically every mage in the game ever, whether you're playing Rumble in the top lane, whether you're playing Karthus in the jungle or in the mid lane, whether you're playing Zyra at support. It doesn't really matter. If you're a mage, you're running that. And so, lo and behold, basically 90% of all rune needs, well, say 75% of all mark needs, are handled by attack damage marks and magic pen marks. Now, the reason attack speed marks are next up, and they're the A tier, is because they basically work on all tanks in basically all classes. So if you're playing Nautilus or Maokai in the top lane, whether you're playing a Mumu in the jungle, that's debatable, I suppose. That one maybe is Magic Pen, but a Sejuani, things like this. Most of the tank junglers, most of the tank top laners, you can run it pretty comfortably on tank supports. And then there's even specific interactions where you want to run more attack speed. For example, if you're playing maybe a Tryndamere or a Master Yi, some Irelia players run attack speed, some Jax players run attack speed. You know, if you're just a really auto attack focused champion in general, you might run attack speed. It's not as common as attack damage, but you're running on, you know, these types of champions. And again, all I'm asking you to do is think about, what is my champion really doing? And you're like, okay, well, I'm going to be doing that. As you go down the list, basically, you start going into the B tier. Lethality marks are basically physical damage assassins plus Jace is up to you. The Midseason Invitational, for example, Xie was running lethality marks, but Perkz was running attack damage. So I think lethality is better. That's why I included it here. I think if you're going to play Rengar or Talon or something, you should run lethality, but it's kind of up to you. Armor marks, the big value here is specifically in tank supports if you don't want to run attack speed, but even better on enchanter supports. If you're playing Nami or Janna, I want to point something out basically. If you are running armor quints on a Nami or Janna type, you should be running armor marks instead and turning your armor quints into AP quints. I'm going to give you a quick number, right? So for everyone who's running like attack damage or hybrid penetration or magic pen on like a Nami or a Janna or a Morgana, I have a question for you. Would you rather run a 0.87 magic pen rune, or would you rather run 1.06 ability power? Now, there is no 1.06 ability power mark. There's a 0.59 ability power mark, which is very weak. But what if I told you that I could magically make that mark worth 1.06 ability power? Now, pretty much every support would run that instead. And that's basically the conversion of, if you run armor marks instead, you can cut armor quints, run AP quints instead, and suddenly life's a lot easier. So if you were already running armor quints, stop it, run armor marks, and then run AP quints if you're playing one of those supportive caster supports that aren't really focused on damage. If you're playing, you know, a Zyra or something, then sure, you want your magic pen or whatever, but that's what it comes down to. And then as far as precision is concerned, it's the hybrid pen mark, right? If you're playing a Kali, Malzahar did this a lot of the time. There's a few champions, Fizz, probably a decent example, but the ones where it makes sense, obviously the ones where it makes sense. There are still some more marks that people might use on specific champions, but if it was kind of only used on a single champion, I didn't include it on the list because there's other things you could be doing with your time. Seals are really obvious, basically. If you're only ever going to use like 1 or 2 rune pages, either go for flat armor, go for scaling health. They work on almost everything. But basically, the only things you're ever going to run is flat or scaling armor, and then flat or scaling health. Flat health is primarily a support rune. There are actually a couple of pro players who do use them in carry lanes. Most notably, I believe Fnatic's mid and bot laner both run flat health seals. Froggen runs flat health seals, at least some of them, and Reckless plays flat health seals when he plays in the bot lane. And flat health, I think, is a very underrated rune. It is the best level 1 defensive seal in the game, period. And if you're taking not just physical damage, but physical and magic damage, it's going to work for both of them. I think flat armor seals are overrated, but it's what everyone is running right now, and it's easy and safe just to run them, but I think flat health is underrated. Scaling armor is fine, but pretty much everyone runs scaling health instead. I think scaling armor is good if you're in a very assassin-heavy meta where everyone's running a lot of lethality and, you know, buying Youmuu's Ghost Blades and Dusk Blades and whatnot. The value of scaling armor runes goes up, but generally speaking, scaling health is better in most cases, so that's the rune that pretty much everyone runs. And basically, the decision between running a flat rune and a scaling rune pretty much comes down to whether you're in a solo lane or not. And occasionally whether you're in the jungle or not. A lot of junglers will run flat armor seals for healthier clears because scaling health doesn't really help you with that. But basically, if you're in a solo lane like your top or mid, you're almost definitely running scaling health. And if you're playing bot lane or the jungle, you're almost definitely running flat armor or flat health. And some junglers decide to run a little bit of scaling health. But that one's just pretty obvious. And again, based on the criteria you're running into, that's what you're going to go for. Next up are glyphs. And glyphs are interesting because it's not... There's no super obvious front runner, and the reason being is that you have to decide between running durability or damage output in glyph slots. And basically it comes down to one of 3 stats. Cooldown reduction, magic resist, 4 stats. Cooldown reduction, magic resist, ability power, and attack speed. And attack speed would only ever be flat, and is a lot more situational. And again, it really comes down to what you're choosing to do. If you're playing top lane into a Rumble, you probably need to run flat magic resist because you're facing magic damage in the lane. If you're playing mid lane against, I don't know, Talon, you clearly don't need magic resist, and you can skip that and run for cooldown reduction. If you're a bot lane marksman and you're up against, you know, Taric Caitlyn, and there's no magic damage in your lane, you don't need to run flat MR. You should probably have a page with scaling MR on it. Or if you want to go really greedy, you can run some cooldown reduction. And basically, again, the same rules sort of apply. Is whether you want flat or scaling often depends on what kind of lane you're in. A lot of junglers really, really like to run flat CDR, and then some don't like it at all. I looked at rune pages for Olaf players, and if you're Peanut, you're running 6 flat CDR glyphs for 5%, and then 3 more scaling CDR glyphs so that you have 5% at level 18, which puts you at 10 from the rune page. And if you're Trick, you're just running scaling magic resist the whole time through, because he just wanted to be tanky around the Olaf. He didn't care about his clear speed quite as much. And it's really up to your determination. It really comes down to what you want to do. Now, special shout out to the ability power glyphs and the scaling ability power glyphs. If you're playing a mage jungler, like if you're playing Elise or Karthus or Evelynn or something like this, you might want to run some flat ability power. If you're playing Rumble in the top lane, you're probably running flat ability power. But if you're playing a mid lane mage and you have no need for magic resist, you might be running a couple of ability power glyphs in there. And really, like, those are the main 4 that work on basically everything. You are almost never going to be going wrong by running a flat or scaling MR rune, because you're almost always going to be having magic damage in your game against you at some point, and all 5 roles need to survive mages, so it's never a bad idea to run MR of some kind. But if you really care about your jungle clear, or you really care about winning your lane, then you might want to say, well, I'm playing Renekton versus Riven, or Riven versus Renekton, I need me some flat CDR glyphs so that I can fight 1v1 a bit better. And that's totally fine as well, and you got to make those choices. But if you're playing Riven into, say, well, let's go with, you know, you're playing Renekton into like a Rumble or something, you might want to go for the MR glyphs instead to survive your matchup. One final shout out I want to bring up here is almost every mid laner, pro mid laner in League of Legends is running something like this. They are running, actually you can't see it, so let me hide this briefly. They are running 6 scaling CDR glyphs, which puts you at basically 10% CDR at level 18, and then maybe you run scaling ability power, maybe you run flat ability power. Because most mid laners are playing magic damage champions, you're very often running into 6 scaling CDR glyphs and 3 flat MR glyphs, which is, I believe, a page I have. Maybe I don't actually have this one right now. Apparently I didn't build that rune page because I'm silly. That's fine. It doesn't really matter that much, but it's a very, very common rune page to run 3 MR glyphs right here, just have 34 magic at level 1. Though worth noting, Faker instead runs 3 scaling MR glyphs here instead. Pretty much everyone else will run something different. Up to you, but that's kind of the decision people are making. In the support role, you might be seeing a lot of those flat ability power glyphs that I'm mentioning down here. The reason that flat ability power is a B tier glyph is it's basically only ever run, to be fair, actually, maybe it should be A tier, but it's jungle mages, top lane mages, like specifically Rumble, because they want the early lane pressure, and support mages. And even then, you might even run Magic Pen. Attack speed glyphs are there for show. Some junglers run them, some bot lane marksmen run them for clear speed or a little bit more damage output. It's really up to you. Scaling AP obviously works in a lot of the same places that flat AP does. And then finally, let's talk about quintessences and where they should come in here. And again, to recap on glyphs, you're choosing between offense and defense. And if you're playing magic damage in your lane, you probably want flat. If you're not, you might want to run scaling, and you go from there. As far as quintessences, again, there are 2 S tier runes that work basically everywhere. It's attack speed quints, which work on every marksman in the bot lane. They work on basically every physical damage jungler. Pretty much all of the Lee Sins in the mid-season invitational running attack speed quints. The Olafs are actually running attack damage, although attack speed is still fine for them, and actually I think it's probably a bit underrated, but whatever. If you're playing a Jax or an Aurelia in the top lane, you know, pretty much anything that's not purely like a Renekton or a Riven where it's really, really, really spell-based up there, you're going to be running attack speed quints more than you're running attack damage quints. Ability power quints are very obvious as well, of course. Basically every mage type in the game. Even if you're playing something like Nautilus, a lot of players, I was seeing ability power quints on Nautilus. If you're playing Galio, it's kind of a no-brainer as far as tanks are concerned. For most of the tank junglers, ability power quints are also better. So if you're playing something like Zac, you're kind of deciding between running... well, Zac's going to run cooldown everywhere. He doesn't really care about ability power. But if you're playing like a Mumu or a Elise or a Sejuani jungle, maybe it gets a bit debatable with some of the tank junglers. But if you've got AP ratios and you jungle, you're probably going to run them. If you have spells in the bot lane and you're not a straight up tank, you're probably running ability power quints. You know, Morgana, Karma, Janna, Nami, you name it, Soraka, probably. All those guys are running that kind of stuff. No surprise. And then as far as the A tier runes, you've got kind of armor, flat armor, and flat attack damage. Flat armor, by the way, is a really, really, really good, very underrated quintessence. What it comes down to is if you are a tank up in the top lane, if you can run 2 or 3 armor quints, you've now got 12 to 13 armor at level 1, which lets you run scaling health seals. And it's the major reason that flat armor seals are going out of style is players have realized how good armor quints are. These are incredibly stat efficient. These are very, very, very good. These are one of the best tank runes in the game because it allows you to keep running scaling health seals. Even in the face of a Riven or Renekton at level 1, you've got 13 flat armor bonus at level 1, and now you can scale up with your health, and it feels really good to be a tank in that situation. It's a very good rune. It's pretty good on some tank supports, although I prefer health regeneration quints on most of them, especially if you're running into like a Zyra or a Nami or a Karma, because those are very, very common in both pro play and solo queue. You might want some health regen, but it's a B tier rune for a reason down there in health regen because basically it's only good in a couple of situations. I think health regener quints are good if you're, like, say, playing a top lane tank into something very aggressive, like if you're laning against Kennen, or you're laning against Rumble, or a Lissandra, or a Teemo, you can run health regen quints and just shrug off all of the harass. And, you know, still, you know, run around with your scaling health seals and scaling Amarglyphs, whatever, and outscale your opponent with runes. But, you know, those are basically your 2 defensive quint options. Attack damage quints are fine. Like I was mentioning before, pro Olafs at the MSI were running attack damage quints. I think if you're playing a Riven or a Renekton or something like that, you're obviously running attack damage quints. Move speed I put as B tier because it's kind of situational. I think it's still a very, very good rune. I think it's very good on mid lane mages and very underrated there. No one runs it, but it wins a lot. It's good on specific champions, like say you're playing Twisted Fate, or you're playing Ivern, or Nunu, or maybe even a Sejuani or something, where you might want move speed for, you know, catching up to your opponents as a tank. Singed obviously is a big proponent of move speed quints for pretty obvious reasons. Lethality quints are, I think, very underrated, but basically no pros run them. They'll only run lethality marks, and they'll just run full attack damage quints instead. But lethality quints, I think, are underrated. I put them in because they are very good. They do win a lot of games. It's just an underrated stat is all. And yeah, basically lethality is super strong. And again, it's for the same people that would run lethality marks. I want to point out, by the way, that if you are running attack damage marks, basically you should never go attack damage marks and lethality quints. If you're going to mix and match, you should only do it as lethality marks and attack damage quints, or just go all attack damage or go all lethality. You don't want to go the other way around because it's inefficient to do that. Again, health regen is just a very good defensive rune. Again, for tanks who aren't running armor quints, they can instead run regen quints. For supports who are in very rough matchups, you can run regen quints. There's a good chance that, you know, maybe Soraka runs them because she runs out of her own health pool very frequently. But that's the kind of stuff you're running in your rune pages. And basically, again, you mix and match these based on the champion you're playing, the lane you're playing in, and what your matchup is. And that's all you're ever choosing among is those situations, right? Seals, there's only 4 choices basically in this game. Marks, right? What kind of damage are you dealing? Glyphs are the only real inflection point. Do I care about magic damage in my lane or not? Do I need to run 12 flat MR because my lane's so rough, or can I get away with some cooldown reduction? And as far as quints are concerned, there's a bit more openings there as well. But again, you're choosing between damage and defense, and then there's a couple of, you know, fun options like movement speed and whatnot. All right, that's going to do it for the rune video. Thank you all for tuning in. If you have comments, please leave them below. And if you want to watch me streaming or posting on Twitter or whatever, all the links are right there in the video as well. Thanks.